Welcome, everyone. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us here at Netcom Learning, a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solutions. We are very excited to host today's event, From Detection to Recovery of Cyber Attacks, the Incident Response Journey. Presenting today's topic is Dr. James Stanger. He is the Chief Technology Evangelist of CompTIA. He has 20 years of experience in IT, working as a security consultant, security analyst, and penetration tester. Having a vast knowledge of cybersecurity, James has developed various certification programs and designed curricula for university and learning center education programs. He's also a recognized writer of courses on the topics of security, network, administration, web development, Linux, and many more. James is also an award-winning author, blogger, and presenter. He's written titles for O'Reilly Media, McGraw-Hill, Prentice Hall, IBM Wiley, and others. He's also a regular contributor to various technical journals, including Admin Magazine, Linux, and more. Now, please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic. We offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored to your specific requirements. If you are interested in a further discussion, you can make an appointment with our learning consultants through our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded, so you'll get free access to the recording in the next 24 hours via email. Netcom Learning helps customers build innovative learning organizations by achieving a smarter workforce, adapting to change, and driving growth. We do this with a broad catalog of offerings, developing customized learning plans, and our global delivery capabilities. Since 1998, we have been empowering organizations with our managed learning services to help them reach optimal performance results and address challenges. We do have 9 practice areas in which we specialize. They encompass people, process, and technology training. And today's presentation is from the security practice area. Netcom Learning offers a comprehensive training portfolio of courses for the topic being covered today. Our upcoming classes include various trainings on the given courses. You can also access a variety of marketing assets, such as the free training and blogs, by clicking on the available event handout. These offerings can be found with a simple search on our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session will cover the learnings about the incident response journey, and you will learn essential skills, best practices, and compliance requirements. This session is highly recommended for IT professionals, cybersecurity practitioners, and organizations seeking to enhance their incident response capabilities. And now I would like to give you a quick overview of the logistics before we get started. To begin with, you do have the option to view in full screen by clicking on the full screen button on the right side of the GoToWebinar viewer. Simply hit the escape key to exit the full screen. Everyone has been muted except for our presenters. Feel free to submit any questions you have for the presenters here in the questions pane, and we will address them at the end of the session. And to get the best out of today's events, we've included the slides, courses we talk about, and marketing assets in the handout section of your GoToWebinar viewer. You may refer to them at any time to get a better understanding of today's topic. And we do realize that some of you may have to leave early and want to let you know that as you do leave the session today, you will be presented with a short survey. We would like to request for you to take a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience and improve our future sessions for you. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. And now I'd like to pass this over to our trainer to present today's topic. Hey, James, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, welcome everybody. I want to talk to you about an incident response journey. Specifically, we're going to talk about from detection to recovery and what an incident response journey looks like. My name is James Stanger. I'm a Chief Technology Evangelist for an organization called CompTIA. CompTIA, we are an education company, and we have members, and some of these members are companies as large as Dell and Ricoh or what have you, and some are as small as a managed service provider. Some are huge managed service providers, but some are just as small as a company of a dozen people down the road, but they're worldwide. And I'm lucky enough to talk to hiring managers, to CIOs, CISOs who hire people every day about, for example, incident response. So as Chief Technology Evangelist, I'm responsible for creating education products. I'm responsible for talking to people who are hiring managers around the world. And so I want to talk to you today about their thoughts about what incident response is all about. So join with me as I talk to you about this. But at CompTIA, again, we are a global not-for-profit IT trade organization, and we are in the education space because organizations worldwide have said, look, we need people who are good incident responders. So today I'm going to talk to you today about what incident response is, why it's a big deal, why it's so important. Specifically, I'm going to talk to you about essential skills, why it's such a big deal, and how you can make your incident response journey a successful one. So I'll start right here. And I'm going to start with not only a little story about what you're looking at here. You're looking at something called the Tower of London, right? That was built because they had a whole lot of incidents of countries and people who attacked England, right? So what did they do? They built walls, right? So that's one way to respond to things. But I want to talk today about what incident response is all about. Because if you look at this picture here, it's not just about building walls and moats and things like that. Do you notice those holes in the walls, right? The kind of cross-shaped kind of things there. Those aren't there for decoration. Those are there because part of incident response is the ability to get visibility. Okay, visibility. Those are there to not only shoot arrows out and things like that or whatever, but they were there so you could look out and see what was going on. So one of the things that is important about incident response is, yes, you got to respond, right? But you also need visibility. But I want to tell you another story about this little bunny rabbit. I don't know if you can see it here, right? So there's me. Here's the bunny rabbit. This was given to my kid, who was about a year and a half old, when he had a seizure on an airplane. Okay. It was a febrile seizure. He was fine. He's been fine ever since. He's now, how old is he? 29 years old now. But he had a seizure on an airplane, and he got this from the pilot. The pilot mailed it to him because the pilot was concerned. He said, I don't want you to be afraid to fly anymore. And so here's the bunny rabbit. And we've kept that bunny rabbit. It's my kid James's rabbit. The reason I tell you that story is the pilot felt that the response that happened when the seizure was happening, it was on the airplane. It was just getting ready to take off. The airplane was. And then James had the seizure, and the whole plane, everybody was very upset, and people were yelling and screaming. And the pilot, very calmly said, hey, we need to have an ambulance come on out and take care of things. And the pilot felt that it took too long for the ambulance to come out. That's one reason why he sent a letter and this nice little bunny rabbit here. It was funny. He felt the incident was a little too long for them to respond. They showed up in about 5 minutes. And they were at the end of a runway, or the beginning of a runway, I guess. 5 minutes didn't seem too long to me, but he felt they should have been there in like 2 or 3, right? So I just tell this story because incident response is something that is kind of personal to me, to help train people to be good incident responders, not only in terms of paramedics and things like that, but in cybersecurity, because it does involve things like visibility, the ability to respond in time. So let's talk about what incident response really is. And there are many elements to it. And I'm showing you a picture here. I took that while I was on a safari. I was in South Africa doing some training, and I was lucky enough to be able to go for a half a day to go out on a safari. And there's an elephant that walked right by. Incident response is kind of like that old story where you're in a dark room and you're feeling an elephant, and some people say, oh, well, it's a snake, when they see the elephant's trunk. Or some people say, well, no, it's a rhinoceros, or it's some sort of cow or something when they feel the horn. I'm trying to say, it's like I've noticed when people talk about incident response, they tend to talk about just one or two pieces of it. And I want to give you an overall view of what it is, because there are many elements. And it's not just about the incident response. The first thing of a proper incident response plan is preparation. You have to prepare. You have to know what you're getting into. And the preparation, in fact, is everything. As William Shakespeare, I think, didn't he write it? Readiness is all. Okay. Well, how do you get ready? Well, you prepare. But there's also obviously attack detection. You have to be able to attack something, to detect something and recognize that attack before you can even now analyze it. Then there's containment involved. You do notification, okay, and restoration of services. And then there's post-containment activity. So there, I would argue, is probably about the whole elephant. Because when it comes to incident response, it's all about restoring confidence. In the same way that that pilot kind of wanted to send that bunny rabbit to my kid, right? So that the kid would feel confident in flying, which of course he does. And so did we. That's our job as incident response people, to restore confidence in the thing that got attacked. Sometimes that's a tough thing. Sometimes that's a tough thing to do. Just to give you, so I'm moving away from the analogies here and showing you some pictures of people who I've talked to about various topics, including incident response. Several of these workers, one of them works for UPS in the United States. They do mail, they do packages, delivery of mail around the world. Veritas, they do backup around the world for various governments. Coca-Cola, right? These are people who work for insurance companies that insure things from bridges to homes to companies for their cybersecurity. They are all very interested in you learning about incident response. There's my Toyota Land Cruiser. I put a picture of that in there, not only because I like my old 1975 Land Cruiser, but because it's something that I have experienced many incidents with this car. One time it slipped out of gear because I failed to maintain it properly. But I was lucky enough when it slipped out of gear, instead of losing control of the car and rolling it, I was able to respond adequately. I knew beforehand what to do in case that happened. And when it slipped out of gear, it was a failure of the transmission. But I knew that that could happen, and I had practiced what to do. And that's one of the first things about incident response is that when something happens, things can happen so quickly that if you haven't made up your mind a year before or months before or days before what you are going to do in case that situation occurs, you don't have time to go, okay, here's what I'm going to do. You have to have that in your muscle memory, how to respond well. And if I hadn't responded well, I would have been in a serious amount of trouble. Okay, I would have rolled the car, could have killed me, right? I'm bringing this up because that's another element of incident response. It's the ability to make decisions beforehand and make it part of what I call your muscle memory. In other words, you don't even think about it. You just kind of react. Okay. That's what's really important. What happens if you don't do incident response right? Well, you can have what some people will call a career-ending event. Okay. In other words, you get fired. Worse things can happen, though. Companies get major fines if they don't do incident response right. People can get jail time, or at least court time. They have to hire lawyers. Now, believe it or not, this is a reality. Large companies, or even small companies, where the stakes are very high, if you are found to have withheld information about a response, okay, yeah, we've been hacked, but we're not going to tell anybody about it. If that's the case, right, as this person Joe Sullivan was accused of, he was found. He was able to avoid federal prison time in the United States, but he had to spend a whole lot of money and time defending himself because he was accused of not providing the full amount of information about an incident. And as a result, his company and he were accused of like trying to manipulate people to save the company's reputation, to make sure the stock price didn't go down, all these things. If you don't do incident response right, you can end up in a world of hurt. Now, there are organizations that respond well, many of them. In the United States, for example, there's a company called, I'll use this. They were a company, they're a government in the state of Colorado. They had a ransomware incident. They responded well because they had a year before created an incident response plan, and a year and a half before had started a backup plan called Backup Colorado. See, they knew an incident would happen and they responded well even before the incident happened. Another example is a company called Bridgestone. They make tires. And they learned from a major ransomware attack that took them offline for a couple of weeks, actually. It was for days in their North American operations. In February 2022, they had a ransomware attack. Well, what did they do right? A couple of things. First of all, they had a written policy. Second, they practiced it. And they did it via various ways. And I'll bring this up later. I'll talk about it later. But they use things called tabletop exercises and practical exercises. These are very important things. But the first thing that they did is they involved management, and they involved non-technical people, because they realized that an incident is something that impacts the business of an organization. And I don't care if that organization is a bank business, a manufacturer, insurance company, or a government. You need to make it possible to provide the services that that organization provided. You need to bring them back online. And that starts really with lots of non-technical discussions. So it's not just about doing proper backup, or it's not just about proper security analytics or whatever. Those are just pieces of that elephant, okay? It's all about bringing it together holistically. So let's talk about types of incident response real quick to get a little more deeply into this. There are two types, I would argue. There's chronic and acute incident response. Chronic incident response is something that happens over time, right? A long period of time. Acute incident response is very quick, right? It's happening right now. It's like chronic pain. It's like, oh, that problem in my neck, it happens every other day and all that. An acute amount of pain, right, is, like if you broke your arm, that's acute pain, okay? It just happens one time, at least hopefully. So let me draw an analogy here. When it comes to acute attack, it's kind of like a large oil spill in an ocean, right? So there's a tanker, it hits something, leaks 1,000,000 gallons of oil, right? Or 10,000 gallons of oil. Well, that's an acute problem, right? There's lots of oil, we can see it. How do I identify where it's coming from? How do we contain the oil? How do we stop, fill up the gap? How do we clean up after, right? But there's also long-term oil spills, oil leakage that could take place from 1,000 cars driving down the road, and there's drops of oil, right? That ends up going down into the road, into the gutters, out into that's a slow chronic issue. When it comes to incident response, from a cybersecurity perspective, we handle acute problems, but we also handle long-term issues. I think that's an important thing to realize, okay? We have to define our terms. So you define your terms as an organization. It's not just a couple of the tech geeks or security people who define these terms. Everybody has to speak, from upper management, from the CEO to the public relations people, to everybody. They have to use the same language. I would argue there's no one national standard. I don't care what nation you're in. There's no one national standard that determines these terms. It's your job as an organization to all identify as to what is going on. And so I'm showing you a few terms, and this is not an incident response class, but it's teaching you what you will learn about incident response. So there's the term compromise, and that it can be used in so many different ways. To some people, a compromise just means an attack. To some people, it's like, well, no, it's an attack that's successful, right? So you determine what language we're going to use. Because if a CEO says, yes, we had a compromise last week, it's like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean by compromise? And if the CEO, if she or he doesn't know exactly what the word compromise means, you're going to have lousy communication to your partners, lousy communication to the public, throughout the organization. I'm just giving you an example. So there's all sorts of terms that are used here, and I won't go into all of these, but we use terms like detection and containment. Detection means, does that mean that it was logged? Or does detection mean, well, actually, it went through our systems and our security analysts have identified that there is a compromise, right? See, that's different. Detection is not just, well, it was logged. Well, lots of things get logged. It doesn't mean it's actually been recognized. So you have to define your terms of what detection means. Containment doesn't mean, okay, we identified it and we're responding. Containment is not responding. So you have to determine your terms very well. And there's issues such as dwell time and containment time and exposure time. For example, when it comes to dwell time, that means the difference between a compromise that has happened, you may not be aware of it, and when you're actually aware of it. That's dwell time. That's a term used meaning that that's how long a hacker was able to kind of run around a system without really anybody recognizing that it happened. Containment time means, oh, I was able to collect data and validate data and implement a solution so that it's a problem. And then the overall term is exposure time. These are terms that I stole from a friend of mine who used to work for, at the time when he gave this to me, he used to work for a large retail company, Target. He's now working for a company called Mandiant. They're a Google company. So Tim Crothers, thank you very much for letting me steal this. He also let me steal something where you manage incident response, where you say, well, look, there's an initial compromise that happens. There's kind of a whole, you could call it a life cycle, hacker life cycle. And there's a person where the attacker established a foothold. If you look at these kind of near the top there, because you focus on the hacker life cycle, to escalate privileges and to initiate reconnaissance, things like that. So this friend of mine, Tim, basically came up with, well, how do we mitigate each of these steps? Do we mitigate all these steps? Most of them you do. How do you respond properly to them? And this isn't just something that you do in a software program over a couple of days. It's something that takes place from the highest of management all the way to the technical people, and they all have to work very closely together. And it requires a change in perspective. We don't think in terms of the defender's dilemma. Think of football, right? And when it comes to football, as that soccer ball, as the ball comes in, you can say, oh, well, the defender made a mistake and that's why we had a goal. Goal, right? That's not a very nice way to think about things, because it's like if one bad link, one IT mistake, one defender's mistake in a football game, and it's over. Think of it in this way. Think of it in terms of the attacker's dilemma. What does the attacker have to do to be successful? See, if you think of that, you're now making the attacker prove that they can get through. And from an incident response perspective, you got to think in terms of what the attacker is going to do, what the attacker has done, and then how you respond well to it. If you focus on this dilemma, it's much more empowering and much more productive. So that's one thing an incident response teaches you. And as you go through the cyber kill chain, right, where somebody's doing reconnaissance, where somebody's delivering an attack, where they're installing and spreading and things like that, what are some of the indicators of compromise and some of the indicators and the problems that occur at this stage? If you can do that and start mapping that out, you're beginning to do proper incident response. Another thing that's important with incident response is to have the proper lens or the proper perspective to look at things. We don't look for people who are wizards anymore. Oh, that's a security wizard. We don't look for that person who can come in kind of like a cowboy and save the day. Besides it being non-inclusive term, we move from that wizard mentality into people who are team leaders, right? Like a soccer team, right? Or a football team, or a guide along a pathway, right? Somebody who can guide the organization through a proper incident response journey. These are the types of people we need as an incident responder. People who are team leaders, guides, who can act as an authority or a detective, right? These are the proper, I would argue, proper lenses that lend themselves to a proper success. Well, when it comes to incident response and creating that policy, you have to start with a policy and you have to make adjustments to company behavior. And that's easier said than done. Companies behave in certain ways. And when they behave in certain ways, let's put it this way, they get used to it and they don't want to change their behavior. And they may change it a little bit for a little short term, and then they go back to their old ways. Human beings were like that. Companies like human beings that way. So how do we make adjustments? And part of that in making adjustments, that's a picture of me. I'm diving in the Orkney Islands in Scotland. That's me adjusting some of my equipment before I dove a World War I battleship. If you don't make adjustments before you go deep diving into incident response, when an actual response happens, trust me, disaster will happen. All right. So here are some organizational issues that need to be adjusted. Many organizations have processes that, oh, it's always worked this way, or this is how we've always done it, but they're not good processes. They're not what I would call rational. And by not rational, in other words, they are processes that are started out of tradition, or, well, we've never had the money, or we've never had the time to do that. It's like, well, no, we need to unravel that and unpack that and rationalize a process. That sometimes is very difficult. Organizations won't understand why they need to change their processes or spend more money on something. They just don't see the justification in it. They do after the ransomware attack or after the hack or after the zero-day attack or whatever. They see it then, but they don't see it before. And this is one thing that's very important. You have to, as a good incident responder, you have to be very persuasive and you have to be very patient, but also fairly insistent in saying, these are the standards that we need to put in place. So the communication level for incident response is very important. That's why I have communication down there and process rationalization in there. Then the technology reconciliation happens. I would argue the technology reconciliation has to happen after you get your policies and processes rationalized and communication proper. Then you can implement your technology. And that means technology reconciliation simply means that you have enough technology, automation, maybe AI, but things to help you respond to that attack, make it happen. So when it comes to restoring confidence in incident response, the things that you have to do is to make adjustments to restore trust either in the technology or even in the people that got hacked, as it were, right? And those people can be the IT workers, you can point the finger at them, or is it the end users where the attack came from? You can point the finger at them. But more importantly, you make adjustments to restore trust and confidence. Here are some things that you need to do. First of all, even the most mature incident response policy is inadequate sometimes, many times. There are companies that do a tremendous job in doing incident response, but then when the actual incident happens, they're like, oh man, we never anticipated that. We didn't think that could happen. So there's got to be some ways as an organization where you can say, in our processes, there's some unexpected things that's going to happen. Here are some foundational root cause things that we can do to make happen. So you have to improve your security controls. Security controls meaning, one of the classic ones is a firewall. Another is intrusion detection, better encryption, better backup, right? All of these different types of controls. Some of them are technical. Some of them are compensative controls. Some are administrative controls. But we need to improve our compliance to policy. And that policy might be some sort of security framework or security regulation that your country has. Every country has a regulation or something that you have to follow. So there's that kind of improvement that needs to happen. Most importantly, communications improvement. Let's talk about essential skills. First of all, you need to know your technical stuff. And by saying technical stuff, I mean layers 1 through 7 of the OSIRM. You need to know how protocols work. But you also need to know the unofficial layers, 8, 9, and 10. And I would argue that layer 8 is the individual. So many hacks happen because an individual gets hacked, social engineering. But proper training of your company workers, from the C-level down to the workers, is very important at layer 8. The organization itself, its behaviors, its muscle memory, and muscle memory can be a bad thing or a good thing. Bad muscle memory means it's like, oh, I didn't want to make that decision or do that move, but it's just kind of what I did. It's how I reacted. That needs to change. We have governance and compliance considerations that have to be brought in, right? So those 3 things, I think, is really where incident response, policy, communication, best practices. People talk about, people, processes, and technology. I just like to talk about it in terms of the individual, the organization, and governance. So there's regulations and best practices that you have to do. Regulations meaning rules that you better follow or you're going to get some sort of fine. In Europe, GDPR. In the state of California, there's all sorts of rules there in various countries, various provinces, etc. But there's also best practices. Best practices, if you don't follow best practices, chances are you don't get fined. But if you don't follow best practices, you'll end up getting hacked. Okay, so these are all considerations that are brought in. So let's take a deeper look into incident response steps as we kind of, mature our process and make things better. In a big way, and I should say in the big picture, preparation is the first. Detection and analysis. Third, containment and getting rid of the problem, eradication, and then recovering. And then 4, Wow. Remember that hack that happened last week? What are our lessons learned? There's the four big steps. Uh, Pre-incident activity. And I've already talked about the importance of pre-incident, but basically you create that incident response plan that helps reduce the we never anticipated that problem saying. All right. You're never going to eliminate that, but you're going to reduce it. You do tabletop exercises. Tabletop exercises is literally where you get the leaders of an organization, and it can be done if it's a huge organization, a department, the department leaders and various department leaders working with IT people. In smaller organizations, it could bring the whole company in, right? And talk about around a table, here's the incident. What do we do next? You know, it happened at 3 a.m. and blah, blah, blah. How do we do that? This is how you get input. And the result of this is that you create a playbook. So you start with a policy, and then you create a playbook that literally is kind of like you can open it up. And I've seen this, the actual book, physical book, because what happens if power goes out, right? Physical book, online or paper, where they actually go, okay, here are the steps. Okay, now that's really important. Sometimes you have to go away from those steps. Sometimes you have to ignore those steps because of something unanticipated, but you've got to start somewhere, right? And that's often a phrase that I hear IT workers say when it comes to incident response, and CEOs. They'll say, well, you got to start somewhere, and it's the playbook. And you do tabletop exercises to see how well that playbook works. Does it really map to reality? Does it really help resolve that incident, right? Then you do hands-on practical exercises. That's a much bigger deal than a tabletop exercise. Tabletop exercise take a couple hours, right, of management time and workers' time. An actual practical exercise. I know a company, for example, the CEO literally at 1 a.m. said, this is happening, and everybody had to drop everything. And it took like a couple of days of people distracted from their normal work because the CEO was very concerned that they didn't have the right muscle memory. So it's that proper practical exercise, and you make adjustments that way. Now, there's all sorts of ways in which you can get standards and create standards. For example, in the United States, there's CISA. They created an incident response playbook in association with the Department of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, where they say, you know, there's detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery. And they have a whole set of graphics here that can help you do those incident response steps, right? And they make nice, pretty pictures and things like that. But it does help you understand kind of how incident response works. Is it the only way to do these things? No, there's other ways to do it. But you can think, for example, in this terms of this flow chart. Okay, you start by identifying, here's an actively exploited vulnerability in the wild. Is it happening to us? Is there evidence, indicators of compromise of it being exploited here? Well, no, then I guess we're okay. Yes. Well, there's the incident response team. So the incident response process then begins. Can you patch it, right? Which is a good question. Sometimes you can't patch it because the manufacturer hasn't made a patch available. Other times there will never be a patch available. If you have an old SCADA system, an old operational technology system that governs a wind turbine or a diesel generator or whatever, they use old software and you really cannot update it. So you do air gapping. What's the appropriate response is what I'm saying. Then you do some sort of patch or some sort of step that compensates for this. So, and maybe you even then you report it to people, not just to CISA, like in this diagram. This would be inadequate for a lot of organizations, but you do proper reporting. Well, to whom? To the board of the company? To some sort of government entity? Is there public relations that need to be involved? Is there shareholder activity? You know, do shareholders need to be told about this sort of incident? It's this kind of flow chart kind of playbook that I'm talking about that's very important, because there are undocumented steps that come along the way. You have to define a policy and you have to make that in writing. There's so many organizations. I have to tell you, I get calls fairly often, quite often, where they either admit to me right up front or they won't admit it to me, but it's obvious that they've never had a policy in place. They don't even have a playbook. They have nothing, right? And many other organizations have that, but they've never practiced it, right? And it's kind of like a football team that never practices. How good are they going to be no matter how talented the individual players are? I mean, we all know that answer. This is why you do this, because you're taking a gap and you're filling that gap with skills, but with proper procedures. So the better approach is, how can we learn more about the attack surface that we are presenting to the world? Where are they, and they'll use this term, crown jewels, where are the most important elements of our company that we have to keep going to keep it productive? What about our government agency? What really has to be protected the most in order for us to recover most quickly? How can we improve our institution's ability to respond, or our muscle memory? How can we become more mature in our processes? And that's a tough one, because the more maturity you have, sometimes, at least at the beginning, the more slowly things happen. After a while, things do happen more quickly, but it's a tough thing to make some changes. So how can we respond to the unexpected? So communication is very important with various stakeholders, and it's your job to identify and communicate with internal and external stakeholders. You communicate with law enforcement, with public relations, with marketing. There are all sorts of things there. And there's a blog that we've created at CompTIA that kind of shows some of those steps that help you bridge that gap along your incident response journey. There's team training with tabletop exercises, various briefings, wargaming, and hands-on exercises. All of these are very important. And we integrate our company policy and make changes as it's necessary to change the company culture. You keep executive management informed at the appropriate level, not just, well, just give them a little bit to make them go away. It's like, no, you give them enough to where everybody's confident, truly confident about what's going on. And you inform end users, you improve detection, and you eliminate repetition. This is where orchestration and maybe even artificial intelligence comes in. And there's various tools that you can adjust, automated and orchestrated tools with Kubernetes, for example. There's monitoring and analytics tools, and all of these end user behavior analytics, UBA tools, and endpoint detection and response, and cross detection kind of work. Create deny and access lists. It's these types of things that are very important for us to understand. Because when it comes to incident response, and these are people I've talked with, there I am sitting there with people. These are major leaders of healthcare companies. One of those is a $32 billion company, healthcare company. One is only about $1 billion in size. And they talked with me about the importance of, well, how long does it take to detect an incident? How long does it take to respond to that incident? How many alerts are we having? Are there too many alerts to where it's confusing everybody? These are the types of things that a good incident responder will take in place. And you also look for root causes. I took this picture in Japan where they were using roots as steps, and I thought that was particularly appropriate to this discussion about incident response. You look for root causes of that incident. Why did that incident happen? As you're cleaning things up, or as you're looking back, how can we solve this? And you also work on decision trees, right? See the tree. In other words, as you branch things out, you make a decision and then it creates another branch and all that. You think about all of those elements to improve them. Now, there are various ways in which you can get skilled in incident response. And I would argue it comes down to understanding the fundamentals. So we have at CompTIA infrastructure, the cybersecurity, and the data and analytics set of products. And through our training, we have incident response in almost all of these. In fact, I would say all of these different training programs. Security Plus, there's entire domain about incident response. In CompTIA CYSA Plus, there's an entire domain about it. All of these elements will help an organization or an individual learn more about what it means to do process-based professional infrastructure improvement and professional incident response. There's some research I want you to take a look at real quick. For example, there's the IT industry outlook. These are trends in IT. It talks a little bit about incident response in there because it talks about how evolving risk and analytics approaches are important. Okay. Also, there's the state of cybersecurity reports that you can read. You can read the 2022 report, the 2023 report, and you can even read older ones to see the trends that have been happening. And you'll see a lot about incident response in there. I want to thank you very much for spending the time with me. Thank you, Netcom, for allowing me to talk about this, about the importance of maturing your incident response and some of the things that you can do to learn more about becoming an incident responder yourself. Thank you very much for your time. If you're interested, you can download these slides. There's a QR code. If you don't trust the QR code, you can type in that very long URL there, and that will get you the slides here so you can study them later. So thank you much for your time and all the best.
Thank you, James. That was most informative. I know everyone is looking forward to the Q&A session, so go ahead and start putting your questions into the questions panel. And while you do that, and now I'd like to give the presentation rights over to Robin, our vendor manager, to introduce our promotions and webinar related courses.
Thank you for extending to me this opportunity to interact with our attendees today. First of all, I would like to thank everyone who is attending this webinar on cybersecurity, where we have focused on the detection to recovery of cyber attacks, the incident response journey. I sincerely hope that it added value to your knowledge of cybersecurity, its implications, and the solutions. In case you feel like revisiting this session for any future reference, please feel free to do so by clicking on the access recording button, and we would be more than happy to make it readily available to you. Next, I would like to offer you a glimpse of Netcom Learning's capabilities and why we are the best that there is when it comes to learning services, training, talent development, and beyond. I take pride to announce that Netcom Learning is the winner of 2023 Microsoft US Learning Partner of the Year award. Netcom Learning has been into the managed learning space for 2.5 decades now and have provided its services to 80% of the Fortune 1000 companies. Having a strong reputation in B2G sector, Netcom has served over 100 US military bases. We have trained over 1 million professionals to learn and grow in their respective fields across 36,000 enterprise clients. We cherish a recommendation rate of 96% from our customers. All these numbers I've just mentioned have been a result of our specially curated trainings delivered by a portfolio of 3,300 plus certified trainers. Moving ahead, being an authorized learning partner for CompTIA, I would like to announce Netcom Learning's upcoming schedule for CompTIA that are highly recommended for you to expand your horizon and knowledge around cybersecurity and its related fields. The upcoming schedules are visible on this handout on the slide. To add value to your learning curve, we encourage you to access our free on-demand trainings and blog posts, which are related to the cybersecurity and cybersecurity threat intelligence. Moving ahead, I would like to give you a glimpse of our security skilling program. This is a specially curated program which is your one-stop solution for personal as well as organizational growth while protecting the businesses from cybersecurity threats. It is a comprehensive program with training on latest tools and technologies from top technology vendors like CompTIA, EC Council, IC Square, Microsoft, and AWS. We highly recommend you click on the Get Started Now button on the handout slide to explore the security skilling training that are highly customizable and are delivered by the top industry instructors through multiple modes of delivery across the globe. On the similar lines, and being a progressive learning organization, we have collaborated with EC Council to bring to you cybersecurity awareness training and phishing simulation solution. Nowadays, whether it is an individual or an organization, no one is safe from cybersecurity threats in today's growing digital landscape. With that in mind, this training solution is comprised of 90 plus interactive security awareness video courses for the end user that offers phishing simulation across various touchpoints such as voice, email, and text. We would be happy to offer you a demo that you can request by clicking on the request a demo button on the slide. You can also take advantage from Learning Passport, which is Netcom Learning's solution to a flexible team training It is designed to be customized in line with the number of learners that you plan to train from top technology vendors like Microsoft, Cisco, Adobe, and more. Single package can be redeemed over 4,000 official courses with a validity of 12 months. Keeping in mind the requirement of our customers, we can further choose from learning saving passports or learning voucher passports as per your need and requirement. I would also like to introduce you to Netcom Plus Learners Subscription, a learning solution that we have developed for our enterprise customers. All you are required to do is invest one time and reap the benefits of this unlimited access to authorized training from top technology vendors throughout a span of 12 months. As displayed on your screen, we deliver the subscription in three types of packages. Free or the silver package allow you to access 300 plus e-learning modules, or you can go for gold at $199. That gives you an access to 400 plus e-learning modules along with silver package benefits. Third, we have for you our best-selling and most popular platinum package at $2,999 that gives you an access to 400 plus e-learning modules and 120 plus virtual instructor-led trainings in addition to the gold package. I would also recommend you to go through Netcom Learning's website for more information such as courses and certifications, our free virtual events, our blogs, and our currently running promotions. I sincerely hope we could add value to your knowledge base in the time you choose to spend with us during this webinar. For more information on such sessions and latest updates on IT and business training, please follow and give us a shout out on our LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter channels. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks so much for guiding us through all that information, Robin. And now we're going to go ahead and jump right into our question and answer session. If you haven't yet, it's not too late to pop your questions into the question panel. And as we start our Q&A sessions, we're also going to launch a quick poll that we want to invite you to participate in. Doing so helps us to know how we can better serve you by telling us who might be interested in more information or in taking some additional training. In addition, we have a lot more informative webinars coming up, so please go to netcomlearning.com/webinars in order to register. First question is, what are some best practices for incident response in the context of remote work and distributed teams?
It's a really good question. So many companies, before remote work really became a thing over the last few years, had very good incident response plans, but they did not take into account the fact that the majority of their workers, or at least some of their critical workers, are now in a different spot physically. So the first step to think about is to take, I would call a gap analysis and say, look, here's our plan right now. Here's our playbook. What kind of changes do we need to make? And so that's where you would do tabletop exercises and practical exercises, bringing in that remote element, and that will help you make those changes and make adjustments. Another thing I would say is with remote work, you're going to have to do a lot more end user training for security, so that and even in general literacy of computers, so that people can do an incident response that makes sense, so that they can all work well as remote workers in incident response.
Let's take another question. Could you share any real-world case studies or success stories where organizations effectively detected and recovered from cyber attacks?
I think that one of the best stories I can think of in this case was an organization in Thailand. I won't go into details of what the organization was, but what they were able to do is that they already had really good security operations center analysts, right? But what they didn't feel they had was a good set of workers that knew how to create an incident response plan and follow through with it. And what happened one time, there was a specific incident of ransomware, and what they were able to do is about 20 of their servers got hit by ransomware. But because their incident response policy was written so well, they had a very good playbook. And instead of 200 of their servers, that's how many they had, just over 200, it was only 20 of them that got taken over. And that was because they had a worker who had been explained to set up virtual private networks very well. Virtual private networks very well, and was able to do some how should I put it? Some redirecting of the traffic and isolating of the traffic. And it wasn't virtual private networks, excuse me, it was a VLAN. He was able to set up individual VLANs. Because they had practiced setting that up, they were able to contain that risk. They were still down for about a day and a half because those 20 servers were very important, but that it would have been far longer, probably more like a month. And it was because they were taught good incident response procedures that they were able to contain that problem very quickly.
Our third question for the day is, how can organizations prioritize their response efforts during the cyber attack incident?
It's a really good question. I think when it comes to the priority, it's really important to have prepared properly and to have that playbook and to have practiced it well. Otherwise, you can't prioritize. If everything is chaos, there's no such, you can't do any priority. If everybody is just kind of running around trying to make it up as they go along, then it's almost impossible. It is impossible to do proper priority, because you'll have people stepping all over each other and almost working against each other or working in isolation. So it's having that proper playbook is going to make it possible to do that kind of priority. And the other thing is, make sure your lines of communication are very strong. You have multiple ways to communicate via mobile phone, sure, via Zoom, but various ways that if entire ways of communicating are now somehow made impossible, is there a paper backup way? Are there various lines of communication that you can do from all the way from paper-based analog all the way through to sophisticated electronic, so that people can communicate with each other? That's very important too.
And we have time for one last question. Can you share some tips for effectively managing the reputation and the public perception of an organization following a cyber attack?
A great question. First of all, you need to make sure that the people who are public facing have a certain level of technical ability. They don't have to be, 20-year veterans of cybersecurity, but they need to know their terminology well. And they need to be careful to be very clear, to talk in lay people's terms, right? To talk in normal language, But if pressed, that they can kind of go a little bit more technical and then say, you know what, I know what you're saying. Here's my answer. I can hand you over to somebody else who can explain the incident in more technical detail if you want. So it's that level of confident communication. And that means that the people at the marketing and PR level need to be trained not only in a kind of the technology, but in the playbook and in the policies that the company has. Very quickly, if somebody doesn't know the playbook, doesn't know the policies, doesn't know the institution's muscle memory, anybody on the outside or inside can tell if they're making it up or if they're not able to communicate confidently.
Once again, I want to remind you that as you leave the session today, you will be presented with a short survey. We would like to request for you to help us by taking a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience as we are constantly looking at how we can improve our future sessions. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. We want to thank all of you for joining us today, and if you do come up with any additional questions, feel free to send them to webinar@netcomlearning.com at any time. We hope that you found today's webinar informative, and we look forward to seeing you back here with us soon. Feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about our webinars and other courses. Have a great day, everyone.